Hi there, and welcome back to SciBurst, a podcast about science, popular culture, and entertainment. We're your hosts, Ella
and Isabel, two science, communication, and sci-fi nerds, steering this spaceship into the multiverse of science fun. Today's episode, Mysteries and Puzzles, the art and or science of? So we're going to be focusing on murder mysteries, their popularity, and why they are so incredibly similar to something we know, love, and hold very dear. Science.
Yes. And as always, we are going to start by jumping into some recommendations. And before that, it's really important that we acknowledge that this episode of SciBurst is being recorded on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country. Indigenous Australians are the first scientists and artists, and we'd like to pay our respects to their elders past, present, emerging, and future. So here we go, recommendation time. Welcome back to Culture Snap.
Yeah.
Isabel, what are you recommending today?
Yeah, so in line with the sort of mystery puzzles theme, I wanted to recommend an escape room. I love them.
They're so good.
I've done like a whole bunch now.
I haven't done enough, I don't think.
Oh, me either. No. I would do one every week if I could.
Oh my God, maybe we should.
Ooh.
52 escape rooms a year?
Oh my God, that
Whoa.
sounds like fun. So you can do them in person, and it's you go with a group, and then you enter a room, and there's a whole bunch of like puzzles that you solve to sort of get into the next room, and there's usually a time limit and a storyline associated with them.
So much fun, and they're so creative. A lot of the time as well.
Yeah. I've done like a magician themed one. I've done a ghosty themed
Ghosties.
one. Yeah. But you can also do them virtually.
Which I didn't know until you said.
Yeah. So you can, there's heaps of like sort of escape room apps that you can download, some which are really, really good. You do have to pay for them, but there are also free ones too. If you just type in escape room on the App Store, you'll be able to find something. My favorite ones are the Room series.
Oh, I have that. I have the first one on Switch. It's so good.
I've played all of them. Highly recommend. That one does cost money though.
Worth it. It's so worth it.
It's worth it.
And it's not very much money for the amount of like entertainment you get out of it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Less than a cinema ticket, probably more time you spend playing the game.
Yeah, for sure. What's your recommendation, Ella?
Okay, so totally not on theme for me this week.
Doesn't matter.
Is this book called Landmarks by Robert Macfarlane. And I've been reading it over the last few months. It's nonfiction, so really easy to pick up, put down. But it is such a beautifully written book that is almost like a storyteller's glossary to archaic and out-of-use language that describes nature. And it is, specifically of like a British and European influence. So it's super interesting, hearing as someone who's like grown up and lived in Australia for a long, long time, all these words to describe like bogs and marshland, and I'm currently reading the water chapter, so that's why a lot of this is coming to mind.
Ooh.
Yeah, about like environments I'm unfamiliar with, but hearing about them for the first time with this archaic and out-of-use language is super fun.
Yeah, sounds kind of psycho-y.
It is kind of psycho-y. The author describes, having specific words to talk about specific things as word magic. And it comes in and out of lots of chats and conversations about like if you give something a name, it gives it more of a personality, more meaning.
Power of language.
Which is interesting that you brought up the psychom point, because there I think is an argument to say that having specific words for specific things is very similar to jargon.
Yep, indeed.
We use all the time in the academic and scientific worlds. But I would say this language doesn't fall under the category of jargon because it used to be common language and it used to be for everyone. And it's just like the author describes it as we used to have like 20 words to describe lots of different things that also had like an umbrella term. And now we just use the umbrella term. but all of the language was for common use, and it's kind of like a love letter to heartfelt descriptions and connections and meaning with nature. And I haven't finished it yet, so I really hope the book continues being this good, but it kind of has a chapter and then a few pages of glossaries of words to describe what you've spoken about in that chapter.
It sounds like it's something that's actually quite easy to read, or just sit down and like read a chapter of as well, right? Because it's a combination of just like a glossary list and some like analysis or something, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it's kind of just like stories about like how some of these words were found and kept alive throughout the years. The author's own kind of like journeys through land. Reflections, which is really cool. I first started reading this while camping, actually, and it's a perfect book to read outside.
Oh, that's so is.
A really, really perfect book to read outside. So, highly recommend this. Yeah, Landmarks by Robert McFarland. They were pretty good recommendations, I think.
I think they were.
So I did say mine was unrelated to today, and yours was related. But what are we talking about again?
Mysteries.
So good. The suspense, the anticipation.
Yeah.
I love a good mystery.
Oh, so do I.
I've recently fallen into, I guess like an actual like relationship with mystery novels and movies and stories, I think is kind of what it comes down to. And there's been so much of them recently. We had Glass Onion at the end of last year, start of this year.
Yeah, and Knives Out before that.
Which was huge, and I think that had a massive impact on the movie industry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there was a whole bunch of like Agatha Christie adaptations recently as well.
Yeah, Death on the Nile just came out. I actually read my first Agatha Christie last year.
Oh, yeah, don't think I've ever read an Agatha Christie.
Honestly, it was so good. I'm so excited to read more. And I'm currently reading The Thursday Murder Club.
Oh, yes. We were just talking about this before recording.
Yeah, I didn't realize I didn't realize there was a murder mystery, but I like just bought it with me because it's the book that I'm reading right now. And I was like, oh, this is on theme.
Yeah. Well, we had a funny moment where it's written by Richard Osman.
Yeah.
Who's a TV presenter. Because I was like, I saw the name and I was like, oh, I recognize that name. Is that the guy who does Pointless?
Yeah, sure is. So we're talking about mysteries today, and kind of like, unlike Everything Everywhere All at Once, and we were talking about, like that popularity, this is a really, really ongoing, deep popularity. It hasn't come out of nowhere. We've always loved murder mysteries. We've always loved, I'd say even just like mysteries without the murder too.
Yeah.
And like puzzle solving and like logic riddles almost.
My favorite things to do.
Solve puzzles, solve problems. Yeah. And it kind of dates all the way back to Agatha Christie, even Sherlock Holmes, classic detective fiction.
And something really interesting about them is that a lot of them also relate to scientists and science, either as characters or even the authors themselves.
Yeah.
So I found out that Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote Sherlock Holmes, was actually a physician.
Which I didn't know, and I've like read and seen so many Sherlock adaptations.
Yeah, and so he drew from his medical teachings and scientists he met and like cutting edge scientific discoveries to write his Sherlock Holmes stories.
Which is so cool.
Yeah.
Fiction based on science. Love, love, love. Good interactions there.
Yeah. And with his medical training, he believed that it fostered a really healthy skepticism as well. And the reliance on facts, which creates this really good foundation for all thought, including writing mystery novels.
I really like, that kind of like skepticism and problem solving and like deduction kind of being a really good foundation for all thought.
Yeah.
And I think that's such like a jumping off point both for science and these types of stories, right?
Yeah.
Really funny
definitely.
how they come together.
Yeah.
So this podcast idea, I was just thinking about, the type of media I've been enjoying recently, which has been murder mysteries of late. And I was like, I think
there's a parallel there.
I think there's a really big parallel here.
Yeah.
And I think they're so much more related to science and scientific thinking
Yes.
than I've ever given them credit for. And Isabel and I were having kind of like a little bit of a brain dead moment. Like
Oh my gosh.
we needed food. We were like, it was lunchtime and we were doing pod planning and it was kind of going nowhere. And I just had this idea and I was like, that is so fresh. And the more we thought about it, the more it made sense. And like everything we brought up, we're like, whoa. So I think today we're just going to share this light bulb kind of moment with you all and how we've made all these connections. But we also found that we're super not the first to talk about like how similar science is to detective fiction and deductive reasonings. There's a really cool article that we'll put in our resources that go out after this episode, written by a neuroscientist. Was it a neuroscientist and author? Yeah. So the article is called "Why Murder Mysteries Are a Lot Like Science, According to a Neuroscientist and Novelist."
Ooh.
Which is really cool because I love that blend of art and science.
Yes.
Like
More of
neuroscientist, also a novelist, the art of writing, the art of planning a murder. Those are ideas that we like throw around a lot. But it is murder mysteries and detective fiction so similar to scientific thinking.
Yes.
And I think that's really cool. Like it's not just that it relies on like scientific methods of, we'll fingerprint and DNA trace, like those really obvious scientific links. I think the actual way of thinking, like your Conan Doyle quote.
The unravelling process of it all.
Yeah. Because what is science other than unraveling the great big unknown?
Yeah.
Not to get too deep on you, but absolutely to get too deep on you. And I also had this thought that it relates a lot to logic puzzles as well. And we see that with the start of Glass Onion. But I'll get into that a little bit later because I wanted to talk about the formulaic style of murder mysteries to start us off.
Yes.
Because my hypothesis is that we love this formula. And it's kind of similar to heist films as well, I guess. But I think murder mysteries are ultimately way more appealing and satisfying. And in this article by the neuroscientist, she argues that it's we like them so much because there's a massive connect between our expectations and the reality. So like we expect someone to be murdered, we expect there to be clues, we expect to be taken along for the journey, and we expect it to be solved.
Yeah. There's nothing more annoying than mysteries that are unsolved. There's a lot of films now that do that.
Yeah. I think honestly our brains are kind of wired to see a fulfilling end to a story, and we all really like that, and it just like tickles something inside us. And I also think it tickles those of us who are scientifically minded and who've spent a little bit of time around scientific thinking.
Yeah. That sounds like us.
That sounds like us. And I also think a lot of people that I know who are kind of like associated with science or technology, engineering, mathematics, I think a lot of them are murder mystery people too. There's just something that we like want to know why something's happened, and a murder mystery allows you to explore that fully.
Yeah, well, it's also interesting because I had a discussion with my mum about this, who is not really a science person, but she does like murder mysteries and like mystery fiction, but she is more on the like arts side. So she has a like arts background, which is really interesting. Like we can like both get the same enjoyment
out of the same thing.
Yeah. Because
it's also the art of how it's written.
Exactly.
And I think the blending of two is ultimately always going to be more satisfying. We, like people who do science, a lot of the time, it's not like you're stabbing in the dark. Like there are things that you're following. There's previous studies done beforehand. But a lot of the time, especially in like experimentation, you don't know exactly what's going to happen, or if you're going to get the results that you want, or what is the end result. When do you stop studying? When do you pick it up and call it a new study? And I think it's really cool because science is unraveling the great big unknown.
Absolutely.
But in a way that, you steer the ship in. Whereas I think murder mysteries are great to relax with as entertainment.
Yeah.
Because you know what the outcome's going to be.
Yeah.
Like because, unlike all the things that my brain is taken up thinking about, like I know I will know the ending. At the end of this 90 minutes, by the end of like the 400th page or whatever.
Yeah.
So you're going to have a satisfying outcome. Whereas you might be working on a great, experiment for like 3 years and not know when it's going to, reach an endpoint for you.
Mm.
But we were having a chat earlier, and I was like, Isabel, do you remember writing like the lab report structure?
Ella was like, what's the report structure?
Yeah. And you looked a bit confused, which I think is really fair because we were talking about murder mysteries. But I've made some connections and I am very excited by these. So, lab reports, a lot of people did them in high school. If you didn't, I'm going to talk you through how they're structured, and it's always like this. Like, you know, scientific thinking, it's rigorous. How you write is very structured, planned out beforehand, logical, reasoned, methodic.
Yep.
So we start with the title, and then we go to an abstract, followed by a hypothesis, followed by aim, then methods, then results, then discussion and conclusion. And I think these are really closely related to a murder mystery.
I love this. This is a hot take
Plot,
from Ella.
formula. This is a hot take.
Yes.
Welcome to Hot Take with Ella and Isabel. I'm so excited. So the title of a lab report or a scientific report, it's meant to draw you in.
Yeah.
Isn't a title of a murder mystery too? Okay, this is a bit of a tenuous link, but it gets stronger. Trust me. You often include keywords that refer to the study that they get unfurled further as you go down because you explain more about the context. You know, you say how you've studied it, why you've studied it, a whole bunch of things. In the recent film Glass Onion, the title itself is a metaphor used within the film.
Yeah.
That relates to a structure that at the end is kind of really just a whole load of like bedazzled nonsense. But you don't know until, like, you know the title and it's a striking title, but you don't know until you've, you know, experienced the story really why it's called that. So then we move on to the abstract. And in a lab report, this is, you know, the first sentences that you read that tell you about what you're about to read, and why it's important, why it matters.
It's like a little blurb.
It's like a little blurb. It's like setting the scene, saying why does it matter. In a movie, this could be giving context to the characters. Yeah. And sometimes that's extrapolated into a background in scientific research, depending on like what level you're at. I know in high school they often like provide the background for you, like all the information, and then you just fill in the rest as you go because you know, taking some shortcuts, learning the structure without doing a whole bunch of the research beforehand too. And I think murder mysteries are the same because you don't have to have read all the other murder mysteries to know like how this character relates to that, or that this detective is actually a spin-off or spoof of Poirot from Agatha Christie series. So then we move on to the hypothesis, which, you know, in science is what do I think is going to happen, which I think is such a crucial element of the murder mystery.
It's literally the same. It is literally the same.
Yeah, the opening film, like the opening shots happen. Maybe you see the body first, maybe you don't. You get to, you know, be introduced to a first few of the characters. And you're already thinking, you know, this is a murder mystery. You know, you want to try and work it out before the detective does.
Doesn't everybody make a like initial assumption about who's done it as well?
Yeah.
You're like, oh, it's definitely that character. And then as the story goes on, you're sort of like, oh, hang on a minute.
As the story goes on, usually I find in modern ones, you're like, it could be literally anyone. All of these people are horrible. Or all these people have motivations too. The hypothesis is kind of like initially what you think is going to happen. And I think that's so similar for murder mysteries. We then go on to the aim, which is normally what we're hoping to get out of this. Obviously, in murder mysteries, we want to know who done it.
Obviously, yeah.
But we also want to know why we're investigating. Like sometimes in Glass Onion, the detective doesn't know why he's there. He doesn't know who hired him. So there's other motivations and aims too. It's like, you want to know who killed this person because they're so prominent. We want to know who killed this person because their house was left to somebody we don't think it should have been left to.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of other overlapping aims, I'd say, in murder mysteries if they're good. And especially modern ones, I think, do a really good job of drawing us in with this. And then we get to methods, which I think is kind of like act 2, kind of like a really bulk of the story, is we're trying to work out in murder mysteries how this person was killed.
Yeah.
Was it in the library with a candlestick by Professor Peacock, like going with Cluedo. And in the science world, this is how are you doing your experiments so someone can replicate it?
Yeah.
So they're quite related.
But then it's also how is the detective like thinking through who did it too, right?
Yeah. There's this list of 10 Commandments of Detective Fiction by Ronald Knox. And this author was in the Detection Club with Agatha Christie. And though a lot of these rules are really outdated, they come from a time where there was a plethora of detective fiction. And he made some rules to be like, okay, let's not have more than one secret room or hidden passage per story. Like, you're kind of dragging on a bit. And one of them is that the reader should be able to follow every single one of the detective's thoughts. Like, the detective shouldn't have thoughts that the reader doesn't immediately know, or they shouldn't stumble upon a clue the reader doesn't know. Which I think really fits into, like, methods is, like, we're supposed to be exposed and taken along.
Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen them do it in some really interesting ways as well. I don't know if you've seen Sherlock, Ella, the TV.
Oh, the BBC
series.
One?
Yeah.
I have it on DVD, girl. Don't even worry about it.
Yeah, you know how they sort of show when Sherlock walks into a room, like the analysis he does of a person?
Yeah,
like
they have a kind of a
bits.
special effects.
Yeah, it's really cool. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, there's this really cool one in like season 4 for BBC's Sherlock where they show like him dragging a window in so you can see like the angle of light coming through. That stays with me forever.
Oh, yes.
So you're seeing kind of like how they did it and you're following along the detective. And then we get to results, which in the science world is like, I've done my experiment, here's the numbers I pulled out, or here's the observations I made. And in murder mystery, it's evidence, clues, observation. We're talking to neighbours.
All of the collection of stuff that I've got from this investigation so far.
But it's not put together yet.
Yeah.
It's just like clues as they come and we're like, how does this fit in? Which takes us to the discussion, which in my mind, other than the next part, which is conclusion, is the most important, but I also think it's the most interesting part. It's like, well, this piece of evidence could mean this. Here's its situation. Like, here's it situated in a bunch of context from, like, other papers that I've drawn out. Other experience that I have, and in the fiction world, conversations I've had, places I can place this in real life. It's like, he left the train at 9:42, but what you didn't know is he came back and got on another train at 9:43. Like, it's kind of like piecing everything together.
Yeah.
Working all out. Making some big leaps. But ultimately, the best of it is left for the conclusion.
Yes.
Which is the big reveal.
Yeah.
This is get everybody in a room. Lock the doors. I'm the detective. I'm about to tell you exactly what happened following all this evidence you're aware of as my audience. I'm about to get you all in a room. I'm going to say, lock the doors. The murderer is here tonight. I'm going to perform for you. And this is the satisfying bit that everyone waits for. And I'd argue in a really, really good scientific paper or story of fiction, like written or movies, or I think you can probably do like podcasts too of murder mysteries, which would be so sick.
Those exist.
Yeah, they fully should. That's so exciting. I think about 90 seconds before the detective says who it is, you should know as an audience member.
Yes.
Like, you should have
worked it out.
That moment. So when it comes, you're like, aha, I knew. Like, it shouldn't be a shock. I feel like it should all start making sense. So you've read the discussion in like a scientific paper and you're like, I bet this is leading to. Like, it is logical. It relies on information, and you start putting together all the little bits of information and the big picture makes a bit more sense now.
So good. Oh,
I'm so happy we came in to discuss this episode earlier. Otherwise, that would not have featured at all.
Yeah.
And that's like, I'm so hyped for this. This is peak. I will never.
That was so good, Ella. That was your own little performance just then too. That was amazing.
Me as the detective locking the doors. Yeah. And I kind of just wanted to, I think that's a really, really fun like parallel that I can make fit and makes a lot of sense to me. In real science, I think the mysteries are still to be unraveled. Like you look at little bits of it at a time. It's never like, well, I've solved the murder, now we're done.
Well, it's a lot slower. It doesn't take 90 minutes to understand the world. So yeah, I think the big questions in science are effectively mysteries themselves. So consciousness, dark matter, how did life begin? Are we alone in the universe?
Yeah. They're all mysteries that we're, trying to solve slowly and methodically together, which is really cool.
Yeah. But one difference, I guess, between modern science and these mystery fiction is that modern science tends to be very collaborative, whereas the fiction usually portrays the lone scientist or lone detective who does everything.
Which is such a myth, right?
Yeah, that's not how it works.
But in terms of storytelling, we do love it.
Yeah. So Ella and I came to the conclusion that maybe it's more fulfilling or satisfying for us to see that in a short form content.
And I think the short form is really important. It's because we like a closed story. Like we want to leave the cinema and have closure. We want to finish the book and be like, job done.
Yeah, exactly.
But science is not like that.
No.
Like, what were we saying? Like, how long do you think it takes to unravel a scientific mystery, quote unquote? Like even just a small one.
2,000 study hours is what we guessed, right?
Yeah.
2,000, it's probably even more than that. 2,000 study hours versus short form content of 200 minutes.
Yeah, or
a
couple
movie.
hours of reading.
Or a few hours of reading.
If you sit down with I don't know, I'm kind of a fast reader, but I feel like if you sit down with a detective book, I could finish it in an afternoon / early evening.
Yeah, if it's the typical, 200
pages.
And speaking of short form content, let's talk about Knives Out.
Knives Out is such a good film. End of sentence.
Yeah, Ella likes it a lot more than me, but
you didn't like it?
No, I liked it. It wasn't my favorite thing,
I guess I'm just more scientifically minded out of the two.
Oh my gosh. There were some interesting things in there that I will talk about. But I'm going to let you introduce Knives Out.
Yeah. So Knives Out by Ryan Johnson. Gorgeous film. It has a sensational cast, really. A cast too good for its own uses, but I think honestly they do so well. It's so stunning, and I love the meta-reflective kind of nature of a lot of modern mystery films, which is the person who gets killed at the start, they're a mystery novel writer themselves, and their entire house looks like it's out of a game of Clue, and everyone knows that, including the audience, including all the other characters on screen. The detectives and the police who turn up the house are like, what is going on?
It literally looks like a Cluedo game board.
And they mention that in the film too.
Yeah.
It's so much fun. And I feel like this has been not modernized. It's been done in a way that's very, very engaging for the type of audience that we have now. But it does such a good job of having different characters who are all hiding something.
Yeah.
And a lot of the film is working out what they're lying about and where the inaccuracies and the overlapping of their stories means and which one is the truth, quote unquote. I really love this idea in the film of how the truth is intermingled with the web of how each of us see reality. And how we hide from what we know to be true just by pretending that the version we want is true.
Yeah.
And they're all entangled together. I really loved the start of the film where all the people are describing to the detective oh, it was my dad. They're all kind of talking about the dad, the granddad, the murder victim, sadly.
Oh, no.
Yeah, they're all talking about him, and they're like, it was his birthday, and we were having the best time as a family. And each of them imagine them right beside him as he blows out his birthday cake candles. And by the second time the audience sees this with a different person, one of them has to be lying.
Yeah.
And it's just that everyone kind of has their own self-importance and the way they see the world and the way they want to think, the way they want to make others see them too. And I think that's a really interesting concept for a murder mystery novel where you're trying to untangle the truth.
What's really interesting too is one of the characters, the nurse character, who has she can't lie.
Such a good dynamic.
Because so she has this thing where every time she tries to lie, she throws up.
Almost immediately.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the detective's like, I don't believe this. And then she lies and she just goes, and he's like, oh no, I didn't mean to make you throw up. I'm so sorry.
Which is a really interesting way of like helping the detective navigate the truth and
having the audience be like, out of all these horrible characters, here's one that we can trust.
Yeah. Well,
and the way that dynamic plays out in the film, because you start to learn things about her too.
Exactly.
Yeah, there are no big spoilers in this. Don't worry, friends. If you haven't seen it, we're not going to tell you the ending. I do recommend you see it. I think it's really fun. I wanted to talk about too, like, though there's like a lot of things that they do that like makes it really modern. There's so many familiar beats of the movie of how we have information revealed to us piece by piece by piece until it all orchestrates together, and then boom, suddenly this like connection and
remember the lab report.
Which is interesting because it comes back to science central in the end, doesn't it?
Yes.
And there's like scientific thinking of like you start with the unknown and you test and you make it replicable.
Deductive reasoning.
Yeah, which is almost scientific, right?
Yeah. I have this quote from, let me just say, this is from an arts criticism journal as well. So the quote is, and it's talking about mysteries and murder mysteries, says, the detective will reason as a scientist, observing, applying knowledge of causes and causal laws, inferring to best causal explanations, eliminating initial hypotheses by further observational testing, and arriving at the end at the single coherent narrative that captures all the data.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is so cool. This is an arts journal being like, hey, detectives are basically scientists.
Yeah.
I love it. I love, like, I know there's like a little bit of confirmation bias when you come up with a theory and you're like, I just want this to be true, so you start making connections. But to see it, you know, be like pieced together around different disciplines, like you got the neuroscientist, you got this arts journal. That's so fun. I love this a lot.
And do we think that that's what the detective is doing in Knives Out? Whatever his name is, I can't pronounce it.
Benoit Blanc.
Yeah.
Which I'm pretty sure is supposed to be like a throwaway to Agatha Christie's Poirot.
I'm pretty sure, yeah.
Yeah. He says something really interesting in Knives Out.
Yes.
Yeah.
This quote as well, about like halfway through where he's talking to that nurse character and he's explaining sort of his method of how he comes to a conclusion, solving a mystery. He says, my method, I observe the facts without biases of the head or heart. I determine the arc's path, stroll leisurely to its terminus, and the truth falls at my feet. That sounds a bit like science.
Hello. Yeah, I think it's really interesting, this thing of like without biases. Especially as the detective is often like, if it's like a family murder or like a small town, like if you've got an outside character coming in, they're often a lot more separate. Their like heart isn't like being tugged emotionally like one way or another. Like they don't have all the context, which is in part what they're trying to find out, but only the important stuff.
Yeah.
They're not like, oh, I grew up with Abby. Abby would never do this. They're like, I don't trust Abby. Who is she?
Yeah. And when he said that, it gave me this thought, and let's go back to Sherlock Holmes for a minute as well. He's actually been described by some people as a personification of rationality. Whoa. And so my brain went, are fictional detectives a personification of scientific thinking?
Like 100%.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, if scientific thinking was to be represented as a character, I think it would be detectives.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be the lone scientist.
I think that's incredible, because I think that suddenly made science seem like exciting as well.
Yeah.
To people who may not think it is.
I wonder how many other people have come to this conclusion in their own time, that like murder mysteries is like science. And I wonder how many of them are science people and how many of them wouldn't classify themselves as science people.
Yeah.
Yeah. I get very excited, and I think people do too, about this like idea of like the cognitive puzzle.
Oh, same.
Which like we're using the scientific thinking and this personification of rationality to unravel. And I think we love the final reveal of when it all comes together. It's very formulaic. And I had this thought that it was kind of like science is our way of trying to understand our world that is so chaotic, but we're trying to understand it in a way
that our tiny human brains can understand.
Yeah, it's like it's a puzzle to solve in itself.
Absolutely.
Which is really interesting because the not sequel to Knives Out called Glass Onion, that movie starts with all kind of like the main characters receiving this puzzle logic box. So you've already got this murder mystery film, and it starts with all the characters having to solve a physical puzzle to get an invite to go to the island to compete in the, like to have the murder mystery party. And it's like the amount of problem solving skills and logical reasoning that has to be applied to that. Yeah. And that's shown to us in like the first 10, 15 minutes of the film. So the director there is saying like these skills are important. These are crucial to these characters, crucial to the movie. I'm showing it to you first for a reason. And that really, really got my brain ticking. That was one of the first connections I made with this topic.
I didn't think about it that way. It's like,
yeah. It's really, really cool. I love that sort of a film. I just want one of those physical puzzle boxes. But I also feel like going back to like scientific people, I think enjoying murder mysteries, I feel like it was always kind of like a maths-oriented kid who was the Rubik's brick or the Rubik's Cube kid in your class.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable.
Yeah, well, it was all throughout like my primary school and high school experience, I think. Yeah, this idea of like logical problem solving physically too, as well as like fictional. I do think they're interconnected. Yeah, I just think they're so entangled. Scientific thinking and all forms of like logic, puzzle solving, problem solving, different ways of thinking, really.
Yeah.
But maybe it also like isn't that scientific. Maybe it's just like problem solving that I think we always classify as like a science skill. But if you think about anything deeply, you can problem solve. Like any university degree teaches you problem solving in a different way. We often attribute it to like STEM, but law, business,
absolutely,
economics,
yeah,
like graphic design, glass making, ceramics, like that's all different ways you can problem solve too, or things you can apply problem solving to.
Yeah, it's just different kinds of problem solving.
Yeah, so maybe it's like, going back to like our title, like the art and or science of, I think there's grays because I think it does lean to and. But it does seem to lean more into like in our collective cultural zeitgeist, this scientific way of thinking. Including lesson plans, ? Isabel?
Yeah, so I want to talk more about murder mysteries and science communication.
I love science communication. Yes, please.
Yeah, so some teachers, both in schools and universities, use murder mysteries for lessons.
I love that so
to
much.
Teach, I love this too. Basically, to teach things like the scientific method and critical thinking in a really engaging, fun way.
Because you got the story telling you why you have to complete the science, right?
Yes, so exactly. And I wanted to also talk about how murder mysteries facilitate an intellectual game between the author and the reader, or the director and the viewer, which already treats you as intelligent. And then to me, it becomes not so much about the answer, but the process of interpreting, the process of critical thinking and problem solving.
Wait, that's so cool.
Yeah. So, and that process, of course, requires attention to detail, inferential ability, evidence-based reasoning, memory, and imagination, which are all key components of science and science methods.
That's so cool.
Yeah. Plus red herrings.
Okay. Red herrings, I think, are so far the one thing that don't really fit into like our current understanding of, like, it's all methodical, laid out for you. We like how it's, you know, step by step to conclusion.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think red herrings are little, or misleading clues, are a bit like navigating scientific misinformation, conspiracy theories, that sort of thing. Because on the surface level, it sounds plausible, tempting to believe, but then when you really think about it and dig deep, it's actually misleading. And so I think in an inviting, entertaining, fun way, murder mysteries are helping navigate those things, or how to be on guard for it.
Yeah, so it's teaching you to like look for the accuracies even when there are inaccuracies presented alongside it.
Yeah.
Super cool. I love that. Yeah, nice.
Just another reason to love murder mysteries. So then, does this also make science and scientific thinking seem appealing, thrilling, exciting, rather than dry and boring?
I'd say absolutely.
By
right?
engaging with it in this
like
sort of format.
We view it as entertainment.
Yeah, exactly. And so that art criticism journal I talked about earlier, this is another quote from it that I wanted to read, which says, mystery fiction affirms the power of reason, symbolizing the knowability and law-like nature of the world, the existence of hard facts, and the power of scientific reasoning or inductive inference, ubiquitous in mental life but clearly exhibited here. Listen to this part. It bridges the gap between obscure scientific method and the layman, showing that the former can serve moral purpose.
Okay, hello science communication.
Hi. Psycom has entered the chat.
Psycom has entered the chat. You know what? She's here to stay. And she's all about getting obscure scientific reasonings, methods, theories to be understandable.
Yeah.
To people who, you know, might just like to know and aren't like trained in knowing. But would like to. And that's so much fun. I love this so much. That's so sick.
Yeah. And then I also wanted to touch on the forensics thing, because I think
yes, please do.
That deserves its own episode.
Absolutely does. Absolutely.
But I just touch on it here. Something called the CSI effect, which you might have heard of, which is the exaggerated portrayal of forensic science in fictional crime TV or books. And then this idea sort of feeds back into pop culture, because a lot of people are obsessed with true crime as well, which then results in this sort of romanticized view of forensics and criminology. It gets people excited about it.
But it kind of goes off on its own path, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting how much that's like referred to in a lot of popular fiction as well, of like I saw that on TV. Like even the CSI effect is kind of mentioned, but we should save that for different space and time.
That's all I'm going to say about that.
I did like want to briefly touch on too, with like real life detectives and forensics and science. If we preserve specimens from actual mysteries, as science progresses, we can learn more about everything from cold cases to just unraveling mysteries of like preserved aquatic specimens.
Yeah.
And we get like more precise information about mummies. Like I recently went to the Sydney Museum and they did an MRI scan for better information on who the mummy was. So you could know more about them, their bone structure, without unraveling it all. And also the date span, which, when the mummy arrived in Australia was not something we had the technology to do. So I love this idea of putting together puzzle pieces as time develops.
Which is a very science thing.
Very science thing. But it's also the antithesis of why, this quick, short form mystery structure. Like this, we're talking about things that happen over like decades.
Yeah.
Yeah, hundreds of years, even if you say that like the mummy being wrapped up was the start of it. And that is kind of like one key difference, I think, is that in the real world, timelines get blown up a lot. And that's why for entertainment, I think we turn to the murder mysteries as fiction, because we still want that logical problem-solving aspect.
So it's a similar process. It's just longer in real life.
Yeah. And I think it'd be really cool if we like in wrapping up this topic, come back to mysteries and puzzles being both an art and a science. I think we've spoken about a lot of different elements today of, the art of like writing fiction and the authors, but also the science that it's based on and the thinking and the logic they both come back and rely on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd argue murder mysteries, both an art and a science.
Absolutely. Both art and puzzles.
Yeah. So we come, as we always do here, to our individual sections.
Yes.
I hope you're enjoying the logical structure flow of our episode structure. Is this like a murder mystery logic puzzle to you? No. I wanted to chat a bit about X-Men First Class, as always.
Yeah.
And talk about movie plots and how they're specifically designed to unravel for you, the viewer, to see and to come to at the end, this conclusion. And I think in X-Men First Class, or in X-Men, it's who is really the bad guy. And as much as we have like a satisfying resolution at the end of X-Men First Class about who we trust and who we don't trust in this moment, I think it's kind of like a white and black surface level. And when you think about it and you get like a little bit more just below surface level, like it's not too far at all really, because the movie shows you this, it wants you to unravel. And I don't think it wants you to accept who it is painting as the villain and the hero, because it itself does it, and it's like walking such a fine line. We have these really morally grey characters underneath this surface level. And on this plot level and resolution level, I think we feel more uncomfortable with it because of the moral ambiguities of the characters, specifically Magneto. And it kind of like brings together this idea of wrong actions for the right reasons. And often like the right reasons, historically have been like we rely on history and the overwhelming and overarching narrative to tell us who is right and who is wrong.
My favorite, because I've watched so many superhero movies in the last few years. My favorite kinds are the ones that actually have complex villains as well as complex heroes.
Like you want to be able to understand your villain to a point.
Exactly.
I don't think any villain sets off to be doomed.
Yeah.
So they like believe in their cause and they also believe it's going to work. But the point I wanted to make with X-Men First Class is, though I think while we love the satisfaction of a murder mystery unraveling, I think sometimes a complete unraveling where everything makes sense isn't what our brains are after. And I, thought that really heavily related to our episode on Everything Everywhere All at Once. And I did just want to bring that up because they recently won a whole lot of awards, and I'm super happy for that cast and crew. I think that's awesome. But yeah, I just wanted to leave us with this thought of like, yes, our perceptions meeting with reality is satisfying. We also still do enjoy the other.
Yeah. Oh, thanks,
that's where
Ella.
it came to.
Thank you.
Isabel, I see you have a lot of notes for your bit.
Yeah. Yes. There was an original idea I had, but I'm going to save that for when we talk about horror potentially in October.
Oh my goodness.
That was a slight leak. So instead, I wanted to talk about justice and whether murder mysteries in pop culture, whether that's fiction or true crime, help or hinder individuals, groups, and the judicial system because of the way it's being portrayed. So some people think that it glorifies serial killers, detective work, and morbid fascination with other people's pain. And yeah, it definitely exaggerates and stereotypes, but I think it's more complex than this and can actually be a really positive thing.
Why?
So there's two main ways.
Uh-huh.
The first one is because most mystery fiction and true crime media, meaning podcasts, shows, movies, focuses on cases that have been solved and showing justice served for wrongdoing, which are then helpful in starting conversations about and raising awareness of horrible crimes like domestic violence and pushing society to make measurable changes to support victims. And so in that way, it's comforting, reassuring, maybe even empowering, and beneficial to emotional well-being of individuals, groups, and communities who have experienced those things.
I really like that.
Yeah. And the other way is, and this is more related to true crime than it is for mystery fiction, in reigniting investigations into cold cases and miscarriages of justice. So it can bring public attention to cases that have gone cold and spark new leads. And I'm thinking of shows like Unsolved Mysteries, which, have you seen any of that, Ella?
Is that the ex-BuzzFeed one? BuzzFeed Unsolved,
No.
and it was huge on the internet for a while.
I'm not sure if it's BuzzFeed.
No, I think these might be two different ones.
But,
But Unsolved Mysteries go hard.
Yeah, so it's like an hour or so each episode, and it's still something that's hasn't been solved yet. And what they do at the end of the episode is like, if you have information about this or like think you can help, like go here and let us know by putting it out to the public like that. So then this can also increase public pressure on authorities, or even pique interest of police investigators to reopen a case because they're getting the pressure from the public to be like, oh, is
maybe we
this
should
thing? We
revisit
should
that.
go look at that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then that also spotlights cases previously ignored because victims were from vulnerable or marginalized communities.
Oh, true.
Yeah, and so I want to give some recent Australian examples, which include the podcast Bowraville, which highlights the unsolved murder of 3 Aboriginal teens in New South Wales in 1991. And then another podcast, Bondi Badlands, which investigates the murders and disappearances of gay men at Bondi Beach in the 80s and 90s.
Whoa.
Power of pop culture, everybody.
Absolutely. Whoa.
Yeah.
That's like really cool and also like a lot to think about.
Oh, yeah. I know. I just dumped a whole bunch of thoughts there for everybody to ponder.
Well, I guess it's kind of the point about individual sections, right?
Oh,
Like,
yes.
Here's some more to think about if the actual episode wasn't enough for you. So that's it from us today on this episode. Questions for you, our gorgeous audience. If you're into mystery fiction, we really want to know, are you also into science and or science fiction?
Do you see any other parallels between science and murder mysteries that we've missed? Or maybe major differences?
Yeah, let us know. I'd be super interested to find out. You can hit us up on any of our socials at sci_burst.
Stay nerdy, and we'll see you next time.
We will. Goodbye, friends.
Thank you to ANU CPAS for their support and access to their podcast studio.